So today I wanted to talk about getting a late diagnosis of being on the autistic spectrum. That is to say, getting a diagnosis as an adult. And this is becoming more and more relevant as a subject. A clinical psychologist told me recently that they are now seeing and diagnosing a lot of adults with autism, even into their 40s and 50s. And I'd like to say why I think that that is happening now. So when those adults, like myself, were children, it would have been 70s, and in some cases 60s. Adults that were growing up in the 50s, 60s, the 70s most likely would have slipped through the net in terms of getting a diagnosis of autism, because I think it wasn't really on the map. This is my feeling. Autism wasn't really on the map in terms of a diagnosable thing. Back then they were more than likely given a diagnosis of childhood schizophrenia and medicated and treated for that, with a bunch of other stuff that they probably couldn't quite put their finger on, but they knew you weren't sort of normal like the other kids. Another word that seemed to apply back then in the 50s and the 60s was this horrible word retardation, which thankfully we don't use now. It just has such a negative connotation. Very likely you would have been institutionalized if you were quite severe. And in fact, I've come across a few adults in their late 40s and 50s that have maybe only in the last 10 years had a proper autistic spectrum disorder diagnosis, and they may have spent many years in an institution. There are also many adults that slipped through the net and have gone through their whole life just being diagnosed with various mental health problems, anxiety, depression, bipolar and schizophrenia again, social anxieties, learning disabilities, because so-called experts along the way haven't picked up the signs and put all of those symptoms together and thought, that sounds like autism now. So many adults have gone through the whole life wondering what the problem was. Why do they get so anxious? Why do they have trouble in social situations? Why do they have trouble processing information? And why do they just generally find life so difficult? Now I think a lot of GPs would just say, oh, you have depression, take some more pills. And because most of them are just that, general practitioners. I must have seen at least 15, maybe 20 psychiatrists and psychologists as an adult, and only one picked up on the fact that I was on the autistic spectrum. Every single one missed it. So many people that are in their 40s, 50s and I dare say 60s that have just gone through the whole life just having such a hard time with all of those symptoms. It's just been assumed that, you know, they're a very depressed person with social anxiety problems and just been given medication for depression and anxiety, when really the cause of all of that anxiety and depression, quite probably because they have this undiagnosed autistic spectrum disorder. I know my life would have been much easier and much nicer if I'd known maybe 20 years ago, that I was on the autistic spectrum, because I could have made allowances for the things I can and can't do, and I would have put myself into work situations and social situations that felt right for me. I wanted to start making these videos about adults with autism, because when I try to find videos that relate to me, 9 times out of 10 I come across videos that say what to do if your child has autism. And that's great that that information is out there. I wouldn't want to take away from that. But I think there needs to be a lot more awareness that there are a couple of generations of adults now that slip through the net because of a lack of understanding about autism in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I'm not saying that having a diagnosis is a magic wand and suddenly your life will become amazing. I'm just saying that the worst thing for a person is to go through the whole life knowing that something is wrong but not knowing why. But once you've had a diagnosis and you can begin to research autism, then you can begin to see how these things affect you, and you can begin to make changes to make your life better. So in summary, if you think you have symptoms that could be on the autistic spectrum, I would suggest that first do some research on the internet. In fact, there are 2 tests that you can do. They were created by Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, who is one of the world's leading experts on autism. He created 2 tests. One is called the EQ test and one is called the AQ test. You can Google those and you can actually take those tests online. And in fact, when you have your official diagnosis, they will probably give you those tests as part of the official diagnosis, so they are actually seen as being quite a good indicator. So I hope I haven't rambled on too much. I try and keep videos as interesting as possible with lots of information from my own experience. Give me some feedback, let me know how you feel about the issues I've raised in this video. So for now, goodbye and have fun.